It started on a Monday morning, the kind that smelled of pine sap and the distant warmth of sun-baked dirt. I had just stepped out of my back porch with a mug of black coffee, ready to check the fence line along the southern edge of my property. That's when I noticed something strange. A glint of metal that didn't belong. At the far end of the emergency access road, the heavy-duty gate I had installed was padlocked shut with a new chain. Not mine. I frowned. The gate had always been a lifeline. I'd built it after the Willow Creek fire 2 years ago, one that had crept within a mile of our neighborhood and forced half the town to evacuate. That back road. It was the only route open when the main thoroughfare got jammed with panicked drivers. I had cleared it myself, poured the gravel, reinforced the gate posts, and even paid a city inspector to ensure it met fire code. It wasn't just legal, it was essential. But now there it was, locked tight, a brand new padlock glinting in the sun. No note, no warning, no explanation. I walked over feeling the heat already rising off the dry ground. The lock was stamped with a cheap manufacturer's mark, something you'd get from a hardware store in bulk. The chain was the thick, newly wrapped. I tugged it once. Solid. I turned around slowly, my boots crunching over gravel, scanning for any sign of why. Then I saw it, a neatly laminated notice zip-tied to the fence post. Emphasis. HOA property. Unauthorized modification. Subject to fines. It didn't even have my name. No signature. Just a stamped emblem of the emphasis Willow Glen HOA and a QR code. I scanned the code with my phone. It led to a page on the HOA's internal portal, ongoing beautification and property, uniformity enforcement. Beautification. That word always set me off. It sounded harmless, almost noble. But it was the excuse Karen Bixby, the president of our HOA, had used for everything, from banning seasonal door wreaths to forcing retirees to repaint their mailboxes. Every 2 years. And now, apparently, it was being used to override a fire safety gate. By the time I made it back to the house, my coffee was cold. I placed a call to the HOA's enforcement line. Of course, it went straight to voicemail. "This is Jonathan Carson," I said evenly. "Lot 14, backing onto Red Rock Fire Road. I noticed someone locked the emergency exit gate on my land. That gate was inspected and approved by the city. You've made a dangerous and unauthorized change to it. I expect a call back within 24 hours. I didn't expect a call back. Karen never returned mine, not since the day I challenged her at the quarterly HOA meeting when she tried to cite me for putting up a reflective house number sign that didn't match the black and gold aesthetic guidelines. That night, I dug through my filing cabinet. Sure enough, I found the permit from the city fire marshal, stamped, signed, dated. I scanned it and emailed it to the HOA board along with a concise message: "The gate is compliant. Remove the lock immediately or face liability in the event of emergency response delay." No reply. The next morning, the lock was still there, and a second laminated notice had been zip-tied beside the first, this time in red letters. Emphasis. Final warning. Structure out of compliance with HOA standard. 3.2b. Unauthorized safety features must be removed to preserve property uniformity. Non-compliance may result in daily fines. Daily fines. They were treating a fire escape route like a garden gnome. I stood there, hands on my hips, fighting the heat rising in my chest. I had worked too many disaster zones in my time to let this go. Afghanistan, Louisiana post-Katrina. Hell, even a 3-month stint helping coordinate wildfire evacuations in Oregon. I'd seen what happened when egos and bureaucracy got in the way of life-saving measures. This wasn't about grass length or exterior paint. This was about lives. I walked back to the house, made 2 more calls, one to the city fire department, another to my attorney. Neither could do anything without incident. Yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of the fire 2 years ago, how the wind shifted just in time, sparing our neighborhood. How my neighbor's kid, 8 years old and asthmatic, had needed an ambulance that barely made it through the back road. That gate. And now someone decided aesthetics mattered more than airflow. During a rescue, I had half a mind to cut the chain myself right then. But I waited. The next morning, I took photos, high-res time-stamped, the gate, the lock, the warnings. I emailed them to the local fire inspector's office with the subject line, emphasis, tampering with approved emergency exit, HOA interference. Still no call from Karen. But that afternoon, as I was repairing a broken step on my porch, she showed up. She always walked like she owned the ground shoulder stiff clipboard under one arm like a shield. Her sunglasses were perched on her forehead, her perfectly blonde bob unmoving in the breeze. "Mr. Carson," she said with a tight smile, "I hope you've read the notices." "I have," I replied, standing slowly. "Then you understand the gate is in violation of HOA Code 3.2b. No, Karen. What I understand is that your lock violates the city's fire egress code 14.7a. I have the permit, I have the photos, and I have witnesses who saw you or your board install that lock." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed. "This community values visual cohesion. That gate was never approved by the architectural committee. This community," I said slowly, "values survival. That gate is on my land, and it exists to save lives, yours included." She tilted her head. "I'm going to have to cite you." I stepped forward. "Go ahead. But just know this, when the wind shifts and flames come over that ridge, you'd better pray someone remembers how to unlock that padlock." She didn't answer, just clicked her pen and scribbled something onto a pink slip, tore it off, and handed it to me. Emphasis: HOA infraction, unauthorized emergency structure. Day starting immediately. And then she walked away. I watched her retreating figure, wondering how someone could be so blind, or so certain she'd never face consequences. But in fire season, consequences don't wait. They arrive with smoke, and they don't care how pretty your fence looks. The pink infraction slip sat on my kitchen counter for days like a silent dare. Every time I walked by, I glanced at it, half expecting the words to rearrange themselves into something more reasonable. But there it was: unauthorized emergency structure. As if a life-saving fire gate was the same as putting up a trampoline or a gnome with a fishing rod. Karen Bixby's obsession with order was nothing new. I'd watched it evolve over the years, from mild suggestions in newsletters, "Please use neutral paint tones for mailboxes," to full-blown decrees that dictated curtain colors and limited porch furniture to 2 chairs and 1 approved planter box. She didn't just enforce rules. She manufactured them, justified them with a phrase she wielded like a sword: emphasis, to protect property value. It sounded rational at first. Who doesn't want their home's value protected? But over time, her aesthetic guidelines grew like a weed tangling into spaces it had no business occupying. Safety, expression, and practicality. None of it stood a chance against her vision of suburban perfection. And now, the emergency gate had become her latest casualty. The gate wasn't visible from the road. It was set at the far back corner of my property, facing the wildland reserve behind a line of pine and mesquite. But Karen had made it her business to walk the easements, weekly clipboard in hand, peering over fences, and snapping photos with a camera that hung around her neck like a hall monitor badge. I knew she'd spotted the gate weeks ago. I'd seen her standing there, arms crossed, lips pursed. I'd tried to head it off before it turned into a war. I left a packet in her HOA mailbox with the fire marshal's signed approval, a note explaining the incident 2 years ago, and even offered to paint the gate to match the fencing. I thought reason might work. It didn't. Her response, a blanket notice at the next HOA meeting declaring that non-standard modifications to perimeter barriers would no longer be tolerated. I wasn't the only one affected. My neighbor Pamela Torres got fined for hanging a second hummingbird feeder. An elderly couple 2 streets over were told their shade tarp was visually disruptive. The HOA had become Karen's kingdom, and like any tyrant, she was tightening her grip. The difference was, I didn't take orders easily. I was a retired emergency logistics officer. For 22 years, I dealt with chaos-coordinated supply lines through hurricanes, floods, fires, even civil unrest. I didn't care if someone thought my gate was ugly. I cared that it worked, and I wasn't going to sit quietly while a woman who'd never worn boots outside her garden club tried to rewrite survival protocols. Still, I played it smart. I called for a special hearing. According to HOA bylaws, Any homeowner could request one by gathering signatures from 20% of residents. It took me 4 days to collect them. I went door to door with a clipboard, ironically, the same tool Karen loved so much, and calmly explained the situation. Some folks shrugged. Karen's just being Karen, they said. Others nodded concerned. That gate might save us all one day. A few were scared. I'd sign, but I don't want to get on her bad side. By Friday evening, I had enough. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. I prepared a binder with everything: permits, photographs, diagrams of the fire lanes, printouts of state fire codes. I even reached out to the city fire marshal's office again and invited one of their representatives to attend. To my surprise, they agreed. But Karen wasn't going to wait. On Monday morning, I stepped out onto my front porch and saw a large sign staked into my yard. Emphasis: Notice of Noncompliance. This property has been cited for multiple infractions affecting community standards. Under review for escalation. Willow Glen HOA. My jaw clenched. Escalation. I called the HOA office, but their assistant said Karen was in meetings. I asked which meeting was more important than a homeowner being threatened. Silence. Then the line disconnected. Later that day, I noticed a white SUV circling the block, slowly, 3 times. On the 4th loop, it stopped in front of my driveway. Karen stepped out with her clipboard, approached the sign like she was inspecting it for graffiti. "You're doubling down now," I asked, walking out to meet her. She didn't flinch. "Mr. Carson, we have procedures. You're welcome to follow them like everyone else." I handed her the hearing notice. I did. "Special meeting this Thursday. You're invited." She took it without looking. "The board will review your concerns, but I doubt you'll find support for unsanctioned infrastructure." "That's not infrastructure, Karen. That's an emergency exit. The kind that saves people when flames come over the ridge." She smiled thinly. "And we all appreciate your service. But in this community, we have standards. Unapproved alterations set dangerous precedents." I looked her dead in the eye. "So does ignoring fire code." She turned on her heel without responding and climbed back into the SUV. That night, I walked the perimeter of my yard under the cover of dusk. The chain still glinted in the moonlight. I knelt beside it and ran my hand along the lock. Cold steel. Silent. The kind of silence that waited to become tragedy. In the distance over the ridgeline, I saw the faint flicker of red. Not flames, but a warning. Out in the hills, the wind had begun to shift. The next morning began with a thin veil of smoke resting on the horizon. Not a fire, not yet, but the air had that tightness, the faint tinge of electricity that made old-timers glance at the sky and shake their heads. You grow up in this part of California. You learn the rhythm of fire season, the way farmers read clouds. And right now, the land was whispering soon. I filled a thermos with black coffee, pulled on my boots, and drove into town to speak with the fire marshal directly. I'd already sent emails and submitted forms, but this needed to be face-to-face. Karen may have held the HOA reins, but she couldn't overrule the county's emergency codes, not when lives were at stake. The fire marshal, a steady woman named Lydia Tran, greeted me with a warm handshake and a tired smile. "Carson," she said, "I read your submission. You're right to be concerned. She's locked the gate again," I told her bluntly. "Put a violation sign on my yard, like I'd run a meth lab." Lydia leaned back in her chair. "We can't override the HOA directly. But if there's an imminent threat to safety, we can document it. File an official concern. Then, let's do it." She typed as I spoke, nodding occasionally. "You know," she said quietly, "there's a reason your property was selected for that gate in the first place." I raised an eyebrow. "Historical fire paths. Your backyard's the only egress on that side of the neighborhood. In a worst-case scenario, it's a pressure valve for the whole block." And Karen had locked it. I left with a printed report in hand, an official statement confirming the gate's necessity under emergency planning guidelines. I scanned it the moment I got home and sent it to the HOA inbox. I printed 2 more copies and slipped them into every board member's mailbox. I even taped one to Karen's front door. That night, I didn't sleep well. The wind howled louder than usual, dry and erratic. My window shuddered and pine needles skittered like claws across the driveway. Something in me knew it wasn't a matter of if, but when. The morning brought more smoke on the breeze. still distant but visible now, curling faintly above the ridges. Then came the email. Dear Mr. Carson, thank you for your persistence. However, the HOA has unanimously agreed that the emergency gate constitutes a disruption of visual continuity. Until further notice, it shall remain sealed. Regards, emphasis, Willow Glen HOA. No signature. No mention of the fire marshal's report. No acknowledgement of the hearing, which was now just 24 hours away. I sat at my dining table staring at the screen and realized something bone deep. They weren't just ignoring me. They were gambling with people's lives for the sake of landscaping harmony. I didn't yell. I didn't bang the table. Instead, I quietly stood, walked to the back of the house, and opened the storage shed. Inside was my old service gear, half of it dusty, all of it still functional. I pulled out a bolt cutter, a toolkit, and a pair of heavy gloves. I spent the afternoon reinforcing the gate. I installed a dual lock mechanism, one for daily access, and one concealed inside a panel usable only in emergencies. I left clear signage, emphasis, authorized emergency exit, fire marshal approved, and then I waited. The hearing was sparsely attended. Only about a dozen neighbors showed up, and none of the board members except Karen Bixby. She sat at the front like royalty, hands, folded lips pursed. I presented the fire marshal's report. I showed photographs, charts, and copies of state code. I played a video of the fire from 2 years ago that nearly took a child's life, footage so harrowing the room fell silent. When I finished, Karen stood. While we appreciate Mr. Carson's passion, this HOA was formed to protect property value and visual consistency. If we start making exceptions for gates and metal barriers, where does it stop? Chicken coops, chain link, eyesores. We have standards. One neighbor, a young mother named Jessa Martinez, raised her hand. But what about safety? Karen's eyes flashed. Safety and aesthetics are not mutually exclusive. An older man near the back muttered, "Tell that to a fire." Karen didn't flinch. The board stands by its decision. The gate remains sealed. The meeting dissolved into murmurs and frustration. A few people clapped me on the shoulder. Most just left shaking their heads. As for me, I said nothing more. I went home, stood under the stars, and listened to the wind whisper through the trees. And I waited. 3 nights later, the fire came. 3 days after the HOA meeting, I found a bright orange envelope duct-taped to my mailbox. That was never a good sign. The last time someone taped something to my mailbox, it was a flyer about a lost cockatoo that kept dive-bombing kids on bikes. This time, it wasn't a bird. It was a threat. Violation. Notice, it read in bold all caps. I stood there, boots in gravel coffee in one hand, and unfolded the paper with the other. Dear Mr. Carson, you are hereby issued a formal violation under Section 4B11 of the Emphasis Willow Glen HOA Charter for unauthorized construction and/or modification to community structures, specifically the rear access gate on Lot 14. You are required to remove or dismantle the unauthorized gate within 30 calendar days of this notice. Non-compliance will result in the following: daily fines of $125, referral to the HOA legal representative for civil enforcement, suspension of your voting rights and HOA privileges. Regards, emphasis, Willow Glen Homeowners Association. Compliance Department. No name, no phone number, just Compliance Department. I read it twice, then again. The gate, the one I built with my own 2 hands 5 years ago. With emergency egress approval from the fire marshal, the gate that was once officially labeled a safety enhancement, that gate. I looked across my fence line, just barely visible from where I stood, and saw the padlock that Karen had ordered, reinstalled this time, not just with a chain, but with some cheap aluminum violation sticker wrapped around the bar like caution tape. As if the HOA now had police powers. I went inside, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my binder. I had kept every document since I moved here: permits, receipts, emails, HOA newsletters. Within 15 minutes, I'd pulled out a scanned copy of the original Emphasis Fire Safety Clearance Certificate from the county. And right under that, an email dated Emphasis March 9th, 5 years ago, from the former HOA president himself. Carson, thanks for installing the rear gate. The board agrees it's a good idea for safety. Just keep it low profile. Appreciate you handling it. I smiled bitterly. That president had retired. Karen had taken over 2 years later. And suddenly, everything done before her was non-compliant or unauthorized. Even safety measures that once saved a child's life. I sent a formal reply to the HOA email address, attached the fire marshal's report, the email from the former board, photos of the original gate construction, no emotion, just the facts. Then I waited. 3 days later, another letter, this one more aggressive. Emphasis. Final notice of noncompliance. You have 5 days to comply or face HOA legal action. We urge you to avoid unnecessary escalation. Our legal team has advised that further resistance will be interpreted as obstruction. Obstruction. They were acting like I'd barricaded a community center, not installed a fire gate behind my own property. But what got me wasn't the tone. It was the word emphasis, resistance. It echoed something deeper. This wasn't about aesthetics anymore. This was about control. That night I walked the property line. The moon was low, casting long shadows across the slope behind my yard. The emergency path ran between my fence and the canyon's edge, a narrow dirt trail wide enough for an ATV or a fire truck's bumper. I'd trimmed it myself every season, kept the brush clear, even marked out soft shoulders with reflectors. And now it was useless, because of a lock. I bent down, flicked my flashlight on, and ran it along the new padlock. It was the kind you'd buy in bulk at a hardware store. Not even waterproof. And stuck to it another notice, this time with Karen's personal touch. Emphasis. This gate is not approved. Do not open. Emphasis. Willow Glen. Oh, President Karen Bixby. She had signed it. In Sharpie. In cursive. Something in me snapped quietly inwardly. Not rage, not rebellion. Just this cold, silent clarity. I'd played by the rules. I'd submitted reports, attended meetings, followed protocol. And now I was being threatened for doing what was right. So I documented everything. I took photos, videos, time-stamped images of the lock, the sign, the gate, the path, the email chain. I backed up files on 2 drives and emailed copies to a folder only my daughter, Sarah Carson, and lawyer had access to. And then I made a call. Lydia Tran, fire marshal. Lydia. I said they're threatening legal action. Fines, lawsuits. She didn't hesitate. You want me to issue an official fire path blockage complaint? I want to know what my rights are if someone dies because of that lock. She paused. Then I'll see you in person tomorrow. The next day she showed up in uniform. We walked the path together, her clipboard in hand. She measured angles, jotted notes, even tested the padlock for herself. By the time she was done, she turned to me and said, "This gate isn't just recommended. It's critical. And it's been listed in the county fire mitigation plan since last year." That was the leverage I needed. I filed a emphasis pre-litigation notice to the HOA through a real attorney this time. I wasn't bluffing. I made it clear that any fire damage or delayed emergency response due to that lock would be legally traced to the board's deliberate obstruction. Karen responded with a cease and desist letter of her own, full of legalese and threat, but with no real teeth. Still, the lock stayed. The fines kept coming, daily now. They'd totaled over $2,000 in phantom charges within 3 weeks. They claimed they'd lien the property. I forwarded everything to my attorney, who calmly assured me they're bluffing, and if they try, we'll file for abuse of authority. But I knew something they didn't. I had time. What they didn't know, what Karen refused to see, was the weather, the wind, the dry air, the crackle in the power lines. It was all too familiar. Fire season was early this year. One spark, and this neighborhood would become a funnel, and their precious locked gate a trapdoor with no exit. So I waited, not passively, not weakly, just like we were trained in the service. Watch the pattern, prepare your defense, and act when it matters most. The warnings came subtly at first, like the shift in a horse's breathing before it bolts, or the way your boots suddenly crunch different when the earth underneath turns brittle. May had barely arrived, but the canyon behind, Emphasis Willow Glen was already the color of old straw. The winter rains hadn't come. The creeks that normally trickle behind my fence were cracked, parched ribbons. Every morning I'd walk the back path with a thermos in hand, and the wind would scratch at the dry brush like it was itching for a reason to ignite. My weather app lit up yellow 3 days in a row. Emphasis, red flag warning, high fire danger. I wasn't surprised, but I was alarmed, because I also knew what the HOA had done. Weeks earlier, they had removed the high-visibility fire markers along the emergency trail, claimed it was unsightly. The reflectors I'd staked in every 20 feet, gone. The bright orange ribbon wrapped around the main cedar tree, visible from the ridge trail above, peeled off and tossed. In its place, a wooden HOA sign, neatly painted, emphasis, private greenbelt no entry. They had scrubbed the land of emergency signs and replaced them with aesthetic nonsense. And that lock on my gate, it was still there, bigger now. Heavy-duty steel reinforced with a serial number etched into the casing, as if they doubled down on the illusion of authority. So I did what I always did when the wind turned foul, and the brush crackled too easily. I prepared. I cleared the path again, secretly at dusk, just me, a rake, and a pair of gloves. The HOA had sent out a notice a week prior saying only approved landscaping vendors may modify greenbelt vegetation. But they didn't own my side of the fence, and they sure didn't own common sense. I trimmed back the overgrowth, moved debris piles farther down, marked escape points with biodegradable tape, just in case. And when I finished, I replaced the HOA padlock with my own. Not to defy, to defend. I kept the original lock in a bag marked and photographed. Documented everything. That way, if they tried to accuse me later, I had proof I hadn't destroyed anything, just ensured a working exit. Still, the air made me uneasy. The temperature rose 10 degrees in 2 days. The wind came from the east, now hot and dry. The kind of wind that doesn't just carry fire, it fuels it. Then came the power surge. One night, the house lights flickered. My generator kicked on briefly. Out on the ridge, I could see the glow of the old transformer box winking like a dying firefly. And I knew it. It would only take one faulty line, one squirrel in the wrong place, one ember from a tossed cigarette, and the locked gate would become a coffin door. I spoke to my daughter Sarah Carson on the phone that night. She's an EMT stationed in the next county. I could hear sirens in the background as she spoke. "We've already responded to 3 wildfires this week," she said. "And it's just May, Dad. You need to have a go bag ready." "I've had one ready since February," I said. "But the HOA, they've made it harder to leave than to stay." She paused. "Is it that gate again?" "Yeah. But worse. They've now threatened legal action if I touch it. And Karen, she thinks it's all about appearances. She doesn't realize fire doesn't care about landscaping." "You know what you have to do," she said. "I already did it." I didn't tell her about the lock swap. No need to make her worry more. Instead, I kept my preparations quiet and thorough. I installed a secondary chain release on the gate's backside, one that could be reached even if the main lock failed. I tested my garden hoses and set my irrigation system to manual override. I made a laminated copy of my fire mitigation report and placed it in a Ziploc above the breaker box, and just in case. I preloaded the truck with tools, medical kits, and water. Karen, meanwhile, was busy organizing a summer block party. I watched her one morning from across the street as she pinned flyers to mailboxes. She saw me and waved her smile, tight calculated. "Don't forget to RSVP for June 1st, she called. "Depends on the wind," I answered. She frowned, unsure if I meant the weather or something else. 2 days later, a neighbor knocked on my door, Carlos Rivera, from 2 houses down. A good man, father of 3. He held up his phone screen, glowing. "Jonathan, you might want to see this." It was a Facebook post from the private HOA group, one I'd been removed from months ago. Karen had posted a photo of the back gate with my lock and a caption, emphasis. "Certain individuals continue to violate community standards and create unauthorized access points, putting all of us at risk. Fines have been issued. Legal action pending." There were over 30 comments, most from people parroting Karen's words, but a few asked questions. What if there's a fire? Wasn't that gate approved by the county? Didn't it save a kid 2 years ago with seeds of doubt? Small, but there. Carlos looked at me. They're scared of looking bad, but my wife, she's pregnant again. And I need to know there's a way out if things go bad. There is, I said. Just follow the path. I'll open the gate, even if it cost me every penny I had, because I'd seen what fire does, and I wasn't going to let a block party and a padlock be the reason people burned. 3 nights later, the sky glowed orange on the northern horizon. Not from sunset, from flames. It started like a whisper, one of those crackling whispers you feel before you hear it. The kind that makes the hair on your arms stand straight like sentries. I'd woken up that morning to a sky painted yellow-gray, the kind of sky that feels too heavy to breathe under. The sun looked pale, smeared behind a veil of heat and ash, and the air smelled like something scorched far away, but coming fast. The wind was wrong. It didn't move like a breeze, it pushed hard and low, like a hand against your chest. You could hear it whistle through brittle pine needles, lifting dust and bone-dry leaves into twisters that spun down the canyon trails. By noon, I'd already hosed down the roof, the perimeter, and the lawn twice. I refilled my emergency tanks, pulled my fireproof gloves from the cabinet, and checked my truck battery. I didn't need a siren to know something was coming. Then, around 2:17 p.m., the first alert hit my phone. Emphasis: wildfire reported near North Canyon. Evacuation recommended. Stay alert. I didn't flinch. I didn't even pause. I grabbed the radio. "Carlos, you there?" I asked. "Yeah," came the response, breathless. "I see smoke. It's coming over Ridge Trail fast. Start getting your kids ready. Put your dog in the car now. I'll open the gate if it comes closer." Copy. I looked up. The smoke was already crawling like a beast over the canyon rim. Black in the middle, gold, and rust around the edges, beautiful and terrifying, like a sunlit bruise spreading across the sky. 15 minutes later, the crackle became a roar. Then the sky broke open. Embers rained like meteor showers, snapping and hissing across rooftops. I ran to the side yard, lifted the lock cover, and unlocked my gate. The one I had secretly reinforced, repaired and tested at dawn every day for a week. But the real kicker: Karen Bixby's house sat 2 doors down, right on the loop. And she had chosen that exact day to host an HOA summer kickoff gathering in her perfectly manicured backyard. Tiki torches, deck chairs, a tray of shrimp cocktails, and no idea what was bearing down on them. I ran toward the street, smoke thickening with each step. People were panicking, now mothers yelling for their kids, sprinklers firing uselessly into the haze, dogs barking wild behind fences. That's when I heard it. Emphasis: the main exit's blocked! A voice screamed. It was Marcus Lopez, a delivery driver who lived with his uncle 2 blocks over. His pickup had tried to pull out toward the gated front road, but the flames had jumped fallen trees and live power lines, barricading the only paved exit. They were trapped, and Karen. She stood frozen, mouth open, clutching her clipboard like it might protect her. Behind her, I saw her husband, Ron Bixby, stumble out, coughing. And then her daughter, Maddie Bixby, 17, terrified. She screamed my name. Emphasis: "Carson, the fire, we can't get out." I ran. I didn't yell. I didn't wait for permission. I ran to my back gate, kicked the remaining HOA padlock off the hinge. It wasn't even mine, and pulled the gate wide open with both hands. The metal seared my palms. But I didn't let go. Emphasis: go! I shouted to anyone who could hear. Carlos Rivera was already leading his wife and 2 toddlers out through the trail. More neighbors poured in, their faces streaked with sweat and ash. Behind them, Karen's family stumbled forward, her daughter Maddie clinging to her arm, her husband Ron helping an elderly neighbor. And Karen, she couldn't even meet my eyes. But she followed. When the fire trucks arrived through the emergency trail I'd cleared, the smoke had choked the main boulevard, and the paved roads were unpassable. But the canyon trail I'd maintained, the one HOA declared unauthorized, that trail became the salvation. The firefighters poured in through my gate hoses, uncoiled, orders barked, and they got to work. They saved the last 7 homes before the fire was finally pushed back toward the ridgeline. By 7 p.m., the flames had died. The sun was a red smear over blackened trees. The air stank of smoke and melted plastic, but the houses still stood. And so did the truth. People had seen it with their own eyes. The gate the one Karen had locked, the one HOA fined me over, was the only reason anyone got out in time. Karen didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence was louder than any apology. Neighbors clapped me on the shoulder, offered water-wrapped arms around their kids. Carlos hugged me with trembling hands. A mother sobbed as she found her missing cat under my deck. The fire had come, and we had survived not because of HOA policy, not because of meetings or appearances or newsletters. We survived because someone, emphasis, disobeyed a rule to follow what was right. And Karen, she walked home alone. Not a clipboard in sight. The air was thick, too thick to breathe without coughing. The smoke moved like a blanket soaked in fear, rolling low through the subdivision. The heat slapped skin like a hot iron, and ash rained down like ghostly confetti. You could barely see 5 feet ahead without your eyes watering. But the screaming that cut through everything, emphasis, help someone help us. It was Karen's voice. I heard it as I knelt by the gate I'd just broken open, helping a young mother steady her toddler as she fled barefoot down the gravel path. The child had soot smeared across his cheeks, his tiny arms reaching for air. I handed them both off to a firefighter coming through the trail and turned toward the sound. Emphasis. Carson, please, she was crying now. Her voice was raw, torn apart by panic. I sprinted back up the slope through smoke and debris toward the top of the loop where Karen's brand new house stood, now framed in a sick glow of fire reflected in her kitchen windows. I found her crouched beside her daughter, Maddie Bixby, who was shaking and coughing, face flushed red with heat and fear. Karen's husband, Ron Bixby, stood beside them holding the family's golden retriever in his arms like a baby. His dress shirt was singed at the cuff, his shoes completely black with soot. Karen looked up at me, eyes wide and wild. The main gates jammed. The HOA chain snapped and pulled the mechanism sideways. We tried the back road, but her voice broke. I didn't say I told you so, not then. Get up, I said. Follow me, now. I grabbed Maddie gently by the arm and steadied her as she stood. Karen blinked at me like I was some hallucination, like the fire had broken reality itself. I didn't know. She started. Now is not the time, I said. We moved fast. Ron followed, cradling the dog while Karen stumbled beside him. The gravel from the trail crunched beneath our feet. The same trail the HOA had tried to cover with topsoil and wildflowers to make it more aesthetically pleasing. The same trail I'd personally cleared each spring with a rake shovel and 4 hours of labor no one paid me for. Smoke curled around us like a living thing. You could hear trees crackle and pop branches falling like bones breaking in the distance. Somewhere down the hill, propane tanks exploded like war drums. But ahead, the gate stood open. And behind it, rescue. Fire trucks had already begun pouring in. 4 of them now. Red tall glistening like saviors in the sun. Water arced over rooftops in streams of salvation. Firefighters moved with method, checking homes, shouting to one another, waving people toward safety. When Karen saw all of it, she stopped short. You broke the lock. No, I said, breathless. Emphasis. I broke your lock. She said nothing, but Ron, he looked at me with a tired, grateful kind of sadness. I didn't know about the gate, he said. You weren't supposed to, I replied. Karen filed the closure with the HOA under temporary safety standards. Never told anyone. I didn't look at her when I said it, because I didn't have to. Maddie wrapped her arms around her mom, trembling. Karen held her close face buried in her daughter's smoky hair. Maybe that was the first moment she realized what she'd done. Not just to me, but to her own family. We crossed through. Firefighters met us immediately, checking vitals, guiding us toward a temporary relief area set up near my shed, the only structure in the neighborhood with a wide enough clearing to serve as a base of operations. Over the next hour, more and more residents came pouring through that gate. One elderly man was wheeled out by his grandson. A pregnant woman clung to her husband, tears streaking through ash. 2 kids ran barefoot, crying until they saw their mother waiting near my porch. Each of them, every single one, escaped through the emergency exit the HOA had tried to erase. And every time someone passed through it, they looked at me. Some nodded. Some whispered, "Thank you." Some just cried. Karen sat off to the side, knees drawn to her chest, holding Maddie, and staring at the place where the lock used to be. Her clipboard was gone. Her power stripped bare. She looked like someone who'd walked out of a dream and realized it had been a nightmare all along. And I stood with the firefighters, helping coordinate traffic, pointing to homes, explaining layouts. My past life as a logistics officer came back like muscle memory. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was trying to stop people from dying. That night, when the fires were finally under control and the evacuation order lifted, the emergency crews gathered near my shed. One of the captains came over and shook my hand. "You saved this community," he said. I shook my head. "The fire did the real work." He smiled. "That may be true. But you made sure it didn't take anyone with it." And Karen, she never spoke another word to me that night. But when she left with her family, intact, and her home only slightly singed, she paused by the broken gate. She touched the metal softly, then walked away. The smoke hadn't even cleared when the questions began. From neighbors, from emergency responders, from the city officials who arrived the next morning with clipboards and fire maps in hand. "Who opened the rear access gate?" "I did," I said again and again. And every time I said it, I watched their expression shift. Sometimes it was relief, sometimes surprise. But more often than not, especially from those in uniform, it was a quiet nod of recognition. Like they understood what it had cost me to go against the rules, but also that there was never really a choice. Let me back up. Once the fire trucks were in and people were safe, I had stayed behind with a few firefighters and volunteers to coordinate basic aid. We converted my side barn into a triage zone, stacking cots and folding chairs, passing out water, sharing medical kits. By 10:00 p.m., the blaze had been officially contained, and evacuees were allowed to return to assess damages under supervision. I was exhausted. My lungs burned. My shirt was stiff with smoke and sweat. But I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Not because of the adrenaline, but because I'd done the right thing when it mattered most. The right thing, not the approved thing. Of course, the HOA didn't see it that way. By dawn, the emails started rolling in. Not to me, at least not directly, but to everyone on the neighborhood listserv. From the Emphasis Willow Glen HOA board. Emphasis. The emergency gate was breached without authorization during last night's fire response. We are currently assessing the structural integrity and reviewing the decision to circumvent safety protocol. They called it a breach, not a rescue, not an intervention, a breach. That same morning, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting to be held at the clubhouse, one of the only common structures still untouched by the flames. She sent notices through email, then had printed flyers posted at the entrances to the subdivision, including one on my own mailbox. I peeled it off and stared at it like it was a summons. It read, Emphasis, Emergency Homeowners Association Assembly, 3:00 p.m. Topic, Unauthorized Access and Community Safety Review. I showed up early. The room was already half full, the chairs set in neat rows like a courtroom. Karen stood at the front, clipboard in hand, because of course she had a backup. And Ron sat behind her, his arms crossed tightly, jaw locked. People were murmuring, some in support, some confused, some clearly on edge. The fire had left our neighborhood looking like a battleground, scorched lawns, blackened fences, melted mailboxes. Tension was high, and not just because of property loss. People were waking up to a new reality. I sat in the front row. Karen cleared her throat. Thank you all for coming. As you know, last night's fire emergency led to the unauthorized removal of the HOA-regulated lock on the perimeter gate. A few murmurs, no applause. She continued, while we are grateful for the safety of our community, the HOA must review any instance of protocol being violated, especially when it involves public safety infrastructure. Public safety, I said aloud, unable to help myself. You mean the gate that you locked without informing emergency services? There was a pause. Karen's eyes narrowed. We voted on that at the October meeting, she replied sharply. It was in the minutes. No, Karen, another voice said. It was Maria Rodriguez, a neighbor 2 streets over, whose mother was nearly trapped last night. That meeting was about trash bins and lawn gnomes. There was no mention of locking the only secondary exit from the back lots. Someone else stood up. My daughter escaped through that gate last night. She'd be dead otherwise. And then another. My dad's wheelchair couldn't get through the main road they got out because someone broke that lock. Whoever did that should be getting a medal, not a lecture. Karen was flustered now. She shifted her clipboard from one hand to the other. We must maintain order. Procedures exist for a reason. That gate was installed for this exact reason, I interrupted. Fire Karen. Not aesthetics, not compliance. Emphasis, survival. The room erupted into applause. It wasn't wild or chaotic. It was slow, steady, and undeniably unified. Karen tried to regain control, but the momentum was gone. One by one, residents stood up and recounted their experience, the panic, the confusion, the roadblocks caused by the HOA's obsession with beauty over safety. Then Ron rose from his chair. He walked to the front of the room, stood next to Karen, and then gently took the clipboard from her hand. She's right about one thing, he said. We do need a meeting, but not about punishing people for saving lives. He looked over at me, nodded. Carson, I'm sorry. And just like that, the room was still. Karen sat down. She didn't speak again. That night, the HOA sent out a revised statement, emphasis. In light of recent events, the HOA board acknowledges the necessity of emergency egress access and will immediately begin reviewing community safety policies. We thank the residents who acted with courage and resolve under crisis. They didn't name me. They didn't have to. But everyone knew. Later that week, I was approached by a group of neighbors who wanted to form a community safety advisory panel, independent from the HOA. They asked if I'd chair it. I said yes under one condition. The first thing we do is write a fire evacuation plan that doesn't depend on who's in charge of the landscaping committee. They laughed. But they agreed. The gate was never relocked. Instead, we installed a new emergency access panel registered with the county, keyed for first responders, and maintained monthly. I even painted it with reflective paint so you could see it at night, HOA approved or not. Because the point wasn't to follow rules. The point was to protect people. Always. It didn't take long for the story to spread beyond the neighborhood. By the following Monday, local news vans lined the street just outside the subdivision gate. Reporters stood with mics in hand, dramatic footage of the fire playing on loop behind them. Houses glowing orange embers drifting across the sky. A firefighter dragging a hose through the very emergency gate I had broken open. Headlines blared. Emphasis, locked exit, nearly costs lives in HOA-controlled community. Emphasis, resident hero, defies HOA rules to save. Dozens. Emphasis, who has the right to say no to safety? I didn't seek out the media. But the truth had legs. One neighbor, Doug Mitchell, had filmed the entire evacuation on his phone, including Karen's breakdown at the locked gate. His footage uploaded to social media had already reached over 1.2 million views within 48 hours. People weren't just watching, they were furious. Local officials took notice. 2 days after the fire, I received a call from the county fire marshal's office. They wanted a full walkthrough of the gate, the layout of the trail, and any correspondence between myself and the HOA. I gave them everything: photos, emails, meeting minutes. Even a printed copy of the violation letter Karen had sent me demanding the gate's removal. The next day, a full-blown investigation was opened. The county dispatched a team of inspectors. They interviewed residents, examined the fire zone, and evaluated how HOA policy had potentially endangered lives. To their credit, the fire marshal's team was thorough and professional, but it became clear they were stunned by what they found. This gate meets all current emergency access codes, one of them said, holding up my original installation plan. Why would they block it, property value? I said flatly. They didn't like the way it looked. The fire marshal shook his head. We'll be including this in our report to the Attorney General's office. There may be liability here. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. The HOA itself was under fire. 3 days after that, HOA Vice President Alan Jenkins resigned. His email to residents cited personal stress and the desire to focus on healing after the fire. But what really sealed it was a whistleblower leak. A former board member anonymously provided internal communications that showed Karen had pushed through the emergency gate removal without proper review. She'd even threatened fines for any board member who questioned her decision, citing aesthetic standards and potential exposure to liability if someone used the trail improperly. The leak caused an uproar. Residents demanded a town hall. This time, it wasn't hosted by the HOA, but by the city council on neutral ground. Karen showed up late. She didn't bring a clipboard. This time, she brought a lawyer. But her presence didn't soften the anger. I was asked to speak. I hadn't planned to, but when the crowd began chanting my name, I knew I had to. I walked slowly to the microphone, took a breath, and looked around the packed auditorium. Over 300 people had shown up, some standing, some sitting on the floor. My name is Jonathan Carson, I began. I live on Ash Grove Lane. I'm a father, a veteran, a neighbor. And 6 days ago, I did something I never thought I'd do again. I broke the law to do what's right. The room was silent. I broke a lock, yes, because that lock was on a gate that could have saved lives, and that night it did. Not because of a policy, not because of a vote, but because I refused to let my community die for the sake of a rule. Someone clapped, then another. It grew louder, stronger, until the room was on its feet. I looked toward Karen. Her face was stone. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but she didn't react. The city councilwoman stepped forward next. She thanked me, then announced publicly, "We are moving to audit the Emphasis Willow Glen HOA's bylaws, and the county is initiating civil proceedings to determine liability in this case. Furthermore, we recommend the installation of emergency safety infrastructure be placed under municipal jurisdiction going forward, not HOA governance." Thunderous applause. By the end of that week, Karen Bixby formally stepped down as HOA president. Her resignation letter cited the emotional toll of recent events. She moved out 2 months later. But the fallout didn't stop with her. The HOA was hit with a class action lawsuit led by 27 residents. The suit accused the board of negligence, reckless endangerment, and unlawful suppression of safety infrastructure. Depositions were taken. Karen was named personally. The fire department filed its own report recommending the HOA be barred from regulating emergency pathways without direct consultation from public safety officials. The story made state news, then national. I even received a call from a major podcast asking to feature the incident on an episode about the hidden dangers of private governance. I agreed on one condition, that they also interview the neighbors who had fought beside me. Because this wasn't just my story. It was our story. A story of a community pushed too far. Of quiet people who'd followed the rules for years until they realized the rules were hurting them. A story of standing up not just to a person, but to a structure that had forgotten its purpose. Safety, dignity, compassion. In the weeks that followed, the subdivision began to heal. Ash was swept away. Walls repainted. A mural was added to the side of the Emphasis Willow Glen Park restroom, painted by a group of local teens. It showed a phoenix rising from fire wings, outstretched a small silver gate shining beneath its talons. We called it Emphasis, the gate that saved us. The scorched earth around the back of the neighborhood eventually turned green again. It took months. The city planted fire-resistant native trees along the trail where the flames had torn through. Families whose homes had been damaged returned to rebuild, and local organizations donated supplies, funds, and time. The quiet road behind my house, once dismissed as an eyesore by Karen and her loyalists, became a place of shared memory, a place where people waved at each other with a little more meaning in their eyes. But the deeper transformation wasn't in the landscape. It was in the way we looked at our community. The emergency gate I installed was no longer just tolerated. It was reinforced, painted with reflective trim, and designated an official emergency exit by the fire department, who installed a coded box only first responders could access. The sign on it read, "Emphasis. In case of emergency, this gate saves lives." A plaque was added just below. It said "Emphasis, donated by Jonathan Carson, veteran neighbor and friend." I didn't ask for that. but it moved me more than I thought it would. One afternoon, while I was trimming the bushes near the trail, a little girl rode her bike up and stopped beside me. She couldn't have been more than 7. "Did you really open the gate that saved everybody?" I smiled. "I just opened what should have never been locked." She nodded. "My grandma says you're like one of the Avengers." I laughed. "Tell your grandma I said thank you." That girl and kids like her would grow up in a neighborhood that had learned a hard lesson about priorities. We had stared into the fire, watched the consequences of ego and control, and decided never again. A new HOA board was elected this time by an overwhelming majority. People who had never attended a single meeting before showed up to vote. Many of them ran for positions themselves. And when the new president took office, a kind retired school principal named Marcia Black, her first act was to propose an amendment: no HOA policy shall override emergency preparedness or safety protocols recommended by municipal, state, or federal agencies. Any such conflict will default to public safety advisories. It passed unanimously. Marcia asked me to serve on the Emergency Planning Subcommittee. I accepted on the condition that we meet outside near the trail with coffee and folding chairs. I didn't want to be behind another podium. I wanted to stay grounded, present, accountable. That's how change sticks. Not with declarations, but with participation. One night, months after the fire, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset bleed orange across the horizon. The trail gate was visible from where I sat. In the distance, 2 young couples walked their dogs. Kids raced on scooters. Someone was playing a guitar on a balcony across the street. I sipped my drink, closed my eyes, and exhaled. Peace. Not the peace of silence, but the peace of knowing that noise, when raised for the right reasons, can rebuild what arrogance almost destroyed. Later that month, I was invited to speak at a regional safety conference. I wasn't a politician or a firefighter or a public servant. I was just the guy who'd lived the story. They asked me what I'd learned. I told them this: when people feel powerless, they either retreat or they rebel. But if you give them a reason to believe that their voice matters, even one gate can become a rallying point. And sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't mean following the rules. It means challenging the ones that shouldn't have been there in the first place. After the talk, someone from the Department of Community Affairs approached me. They were starting a new task force focused on creating clearer boundaries between HOA authority and public safety. They asked if I'd be willing to consult. I said yes. Not because I wanted revenge, not even because I wanted recognition, but because the next fire might not come with warning. And if I could help one more gate stay open, then all of this, the fines, the fear, the backlash, would be worth it. In the end, Karen's family recovered. Her house was repaired. I heard they moved to another state closer to her in-laws. We never spoke again. And I never needed her apology, because the community itself apologized in actions, in votes, in the way they stood beside me when it mattered most. From scorched ground, we built something better. And every time I walk past that trail gate, I remind myself, the strongest fences don't keep people out. They keep danger from taking everything we love.